get there. So we want to add another policy dimension. But on our way, I have discovered that UCD students, by and large, have not seen the Edgeworth box. Have you guys seen the Edgeworth box? Raise your hand if you've seen it, or like this, have you seen it? Anyone? Nobody's seen the Edgeworth box. See, so now we got to do an aside. Like we have to do, has nothing to do with politics. We're leaving politics behind for I don't know, 30, 40 minutes, because you can't come out of an economist out of a university and not have seen the Edgeworth box, particularly in Ireland, because Mr. Edgeworth is Irish. And so like we should like of all people, like I had it in my undergrad, it's a thing. And so we should have it. So we'll talk about the Edgeworth box. And this has 2 points to it. The first point is, as an educated economist, it is something that you have to have seen. Like it's ridiculous that you don't. So after today, you will have, and then that problem will be solved. And the other thing is it starts to get us to be looking at a graph with more than one thing going on. So the graph is similar to the kind of graphs we're going to use. It's not the same, but it's similar. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is named, of course, after Mr. Edgeworth, who's Irish guy. I think he was off in Cambridge or something, but he's from the early parts of this century. I think his niece was also famous. Like, they're all aristocratic guys back in the day, so like everyone was famous and their thing. Like, but his niece, I think, is up on the Icon Walk down in Dublin for some kind of fashion thing. But he's famous for the economics and the math. Okay, so I want you to leave the world of politics. Let it drift away. And, like you get those dream sequences in movies. This is where that is, or where you start dreaming about economics instead of politics, right? Or in that kind of thing. And we're going way back to principles of microeconomics. And we had our good friends X1 and X2, right? And these were two goods, two things that we wanted, and you could have more of one, less of the other one. And we said, well, suppose I started out here, and that's my endowment. Right, so I started out my life. This is a little different from how they probably said it, but it's the same. I started out my life with a certain amount of X1 and a certain amount of X2. And then we can say, let's put down all the points that give me exactly the same happiness, exactly the same utility, right? And that gave us our indifference curve. Right? And moving in this direction was better. Why was it better? Because we assumed that more is better, that this guy doesn't have so much that it's a burden to him, that he's in a place in his life where he would like more of X1 and he would like more of X2. And so moving in that direction would be better, but all the points on the blue curve give him exactly the same utility as he's got that he was born with. Right? And we draw it this way because we're assuming diminishing marginal rate of substitution. That is, when he's here and he wants to get one more of X1, he's willing to give up quite a bit of X2 to get a little bit of X1. Right? But as he gets more and more X1, when he gets way out here, then he's got loads of X1 and he's got very little X2. And so he's willing to give up less X2 to get X1. X1 isn't as attractive to him as it was before because he's got loads of it. And X2 is very precious because he has very little of it. And so the slope gets flatter. He's only willing to give up a tiny bit to get more of X1. Right? So it starts out steep and it gets flatter and flatter and flatter. And that was our story. Okay? Everyone with me here? Okay. Yeah, nothing new, but just to remind you. Okay. Now, Let's start this out again. X1, X2. We've got his endowment. We've got his indifference curve. And then we put this poor sap into an economy. And he's just going around minding his own business. This is what he wants. This is what he had. There was no interactions there with anybody. But now we're going to put him in an economy. And that economy allows you to buy and sell stuff. So you can, if you want, you can sell some of your X1, and you can use that to buy some X2. Okay? And we can represent that economy with a price line. Let me put in a price line. Okay. And that price line represents how I can trade off in the market my X1 for X2. I can sell a little bit of X1, or let's sell a little bit of X2, and use it to buy X1. Okay? And then we say, well, what's this guy going to do? Well, he's going to try to make himself as happy as he possibly can. Okay? This is our basic assumption in economics. It's not going to help the poor, that's for sure. What he's going to do is he's going to make himself as happy as he can. And so he's going to try to get on the highest indifference curve that he can. And this price line has become the set of things that are possible to him. Right? The blue is all the things that make him equally happy. But the purple, or whatever it is, purple is what he can actually get given the market economy that he's living in. Okay? And so he's going to use that to get as happy as he possibly can. Okay? And so he's going to go up to the point where he's got an indifference curve that's just tangent to this. And so he's going to sell this much X2 and use that to buy a whole lot of X1, because in this price line, X1 is cheap and X2 is expensive. So he sells a little bit of X2, and he moves along the price line, and he gets on a better indifference curve. And the beautiful thing about this is that it really doesn't matter what price line we pick, that he's always going to be able to do at least as well as where he started, and probably better. I could have picked, for example, a very flat price line, if I can draw this, a very steep price line. So we've got our initial point here. And I draw in a very steep price line, like that, super steep. And then he's going to go to some point like that, where we're just tangent. Okay. So, well, that's not very badly drawn. But you can see, as long as you have a different slope than your indifference curve, there's going to be some gap between the, okay, yeah, I see people saying, what the hell? Okay, let me draw it better. Let me draw it better. How? You're allowed to say, what the hell? You're making no sense. That's perfectly fair. Okay. Let me do the indifference curve again. Draw better. Black point. Okay. Now, I'm drawing a price line, which is a slope. It represents the trade-off between X1 and X2, the relative price of X1 versus the relative price of X2. So if I sell some X1, how much X2 can I buy? If I sell some X2, how much X1 can I buy, right? And so the one I drew before was very flat, saying X2 was very expensive and X1 was very cheap, right? And so what he did is he sold a little bit of X2 and he bought a whole lot of X1. Okay? I could do it the other way, right? I could make X1 very expensive and X2 very cheap. So let me do that. And that's going to give me a very steep price line like this. Right? Because if I sell a little bit of X1, I can buy a whole lot of X2. Or if I sell a little bit of X2, I can buy very, very, very little X1. Right? But the important thing here is that even though I picked a totally different price line, there is still There's still this gap between my original indifference curve. I find a way to do this. My original indifference curve and this price line. The price line gives me the opportunities that I have in the marketplace, right? All the things that I can do in the marketplace, the trade-offs I can make, starting from my initial endowment, I can buy and sell stuff. So I could sell X2 and buy X1 and move along this line this way. Or I could sell X1 and buy X2 and move along this line this way. And as long as there's a gap between the indifference curve and the price line, I can do better. Right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a point like this where they're just tangent. So as long as the price line isn't exactly equal to the slope of my indifference curve at my endowment, I can do better. And if the price line is just equal to the slope of my indifference curve, then I can do just the same. I can't do any better, won't do any worse. Because I can always hold on to my endowment. Okay, people with me here? Okay, very brief recap, but there it is. Okay, so there's no Box, there's no Edgeworth. It has nothing to do with him. Who came up with all this stuff? I can't remember. Way back in the mist of time, late 1800s, all this stuff was developed, but neither here nor there. That's old news, right? Now, along comes Mr. Edgeworth. And Mr. Edgeworth says, well, where do these prices come from anyway? Well, it's got to be people swapping, right? And so we need to do that, we need to be thinking about it in terms of, all the stuff people might be swapping, right? And we need to sort of put the two people or a million people that might be swapping stuff between each other together so we can find out what those prices are. Okay? And so we're going to do it the way that's easiest with two people. Okay? So we're going to suppose there's two people, and the reason we're doing two is because it allows us to graph it. If we did more than two, we wouldn't have enough dimensions on our blackboard. Right? But we're going to do two people, and they're going to be trying to come up with how to deal with this X1 and X2. So I'm going to make this box. You may guess the name of this box. It's Mr. Edgeworth's magic box. And here I've got X1, and here I've got X2, in just the way we had before. And before, we just said, well, there's X1, and you can have as much X1 as you like, and there's X2, and you can have as much X2 as you like. But now we're going to suppose that there's a limited amount of X1 in the world, and there's a limited amount of X2 in the world. So this distance here, from here to here, that's all the X1 there is in the world. Okay? And this distance from here up to here, that's all the X2 there is in the world. Okay? So you can't have an infinite amount of X2 because it doesn't exist. You can have up till there. Okay? And then this endowment, we're going to have two guys, and I'm going to have guy 1 here, and I'm going to put guy 2 here in a way that I'll explain in a minute. Right? So guy 2 we're going to look at sort of upside down, and moving in this direction is going to be better for him. And moving in this direction is better for guy 1. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so let's get our endowment. What is our endowment? It's an amount that the guy starts out this world with. Right? Now, real life is more complicated. You don't just have the stuff, you create the stuff and all of that. But we're going to pretend like you just have the stuff and you swap it around. Right? So I'm going to have an endowment just like we had before. And here's a spot just like we had before. And we know what that is. We know that that's guy 1 has this much X1, and he has this much X2. But now that we've set up the world where there's this total amount of stuff, if guy 1 has it, then he's got it. If guy 1 doesn't have it, it must be that guy 2 owns it. Right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, that's what guy 1 has, but guy 2 has that much, right? Because he has all the leftover. Guy 1 has this much, and the rest of it is guy 2's. And you carry this over. Guy 1 has this much, x2, so the rest of it must be guy 2's. So this dot gives us the distribution of these goods between them because we've set up this box, this Edgeworth box, right? And so we can put in guy 1's indifference curves in just the way we did before. And of course, going out like that is better, right? Because he's just a normal guy, right? He wants more, more is better. Now we want to do the same thing for guy 2. And the way to do this is to think, well, moving in this direction is better for guy 2, right? Because if he's here, he's got nothing. He's got no x1, he's got no x2. If we move in this direction, he gets more x1. If we move in that direction, he gets more x2. So moving in this general direction is better for him. In fact, the whole thing is just upside down. If you turn the whole thing over, you'll see it from guy 2's perspective. I don't know, I can't flip my screen, but if we flipped it over, we'd see the whole thing from guy 2's perspective. So let me go to another page. We'll do this again. So here's guy 1, here's guy 2. So we got x1, we got x2. And so just from guy 2's perspective, moving in this direction is better. And so if we start out with a point like this for him, his indifference curve, which I'll do in green, is going to look something like that. And another indifference curve is going to look like that, and that direction is better. Right? People with me here? It's just the upside down version of guy 1's. I'm trying to interpret the looks. Some of the looks are clearly bored, and that's fine. I don't mind that. Some of the looks look confused, and those are the ones I'm concerned about. If you want me to continue like this, go like that, and then, yeah, okay. People are not grasping. Hey, fair enough. It's the first time to see it. Okay, let's go through and draw the indifference curve slowly. Guy 1 looks just like any other thing. All we've done is we've put these other axes in, right? So for him, it's just normal everyday microeconomics. So it's guy 2 that we're worried about here, right? And so here we got guy 2. And we're starting him out someplace. So I'm going to start him out here, and we're going to try to do his indifference curve. So what is this saying? This is saying he's got this much x1, and he's got, x2. And he's got that much x1. Okay. Now we have to construct an indifference curve for him. And the way you construct an indifference curve for somebody is you do something nice for him. You see he's getting happy, and then you do something mean to him so he goes back to his original amount of happiness. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do for him is I'm going to do something nice. And the nice thing I'm going to do for him is I'm going to give him a little bit of x1. He walks in the door, here you go, guy 2, and he's like, yay, happy day, this is nice, right? And so I give him some x1. That's moving him in this direction, and I see his little face get happy. Happy boy. Nice. Well, I don't want a happy boy. What I want is a guy who's just as miserable as when he came in the door, right? Because I'm doing indifference curve science, and his happiness is nothing to me. So I gave him some x1. And now he's happy. Damn. So now I have to do something mean. And so the mean thing I do is I take away some x2. Right? And as I take away some x2, I watch his face until it goes back to the same kind of scowl that it had coming in. And so I take away some x2 by moving in this direction. and that makes him sad. And I get the sadness to just balance out the happiness till he's back to the same amount of happiness he had to begin with. And when I get there, that becomes a point on his indifference curve, right? Because he's got the same happy in the original spot as he's got in the new spot. Okay. And then I do it again, because I'm a bastard. And I get here, and he's a sucker. It's like a goldfish. He can't remember what happened before. And I give him some x1. And, yay, happy boy. I give him some x1. Right? And he gets happy, but not as big a face as it was before. Right? Because now he's got loads of x1. Right? Before he had an x1 shortage. And when I gave him some x1 before, it was really great news, because that was what he was short of. But now he's got loads of x1, and I'm giving him x1. Yeah, it's nice, it's not bad, but it's okay. Thanks. And now I got to make him sad because, again, bastard, right? And so I have to make him sad, so I have to take away some x2. But now, as I take away x2, first of all, he's not as happy as he was before from getting the x1 because he has so much to begin with. And he's short of x2. So when I start taking x2, it really hurts. Right? And so he gets sad really quick. But again, I just balance it out. But now the slope is less. So my indifference curve looks something like that. The slope between here and here is more than the slope between here and here. Because at the original point, he was short of x1, but he had loads of x2. And then the trade-off changes. That's just the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. But notice that my indifference curve is sort of upside down from our normal ones. You can look at it like a normal one by just flipping your page upside down. If you put it on the page, if I could flip the screen upside down, I would. And then it would just look like a normal everyday thing. We've just defined everything. Moving to the left is more. Moving down is more. Whereas before, normally, moving to the right is more. Moving up is more, but we've just flipped those, and so everything is just flipped from his perspective. But it's exactly the same story that we always had. There's nothing new or different about it. Same story, right? Okay, and of course, having more of both is better, so this is better. And he's got indifference curves that look like that. So if we put these two guys, let me just sort of draw them two separate, just to sort of. Okay, so guy 1 has indifference curves that look like this. Moving this direction is better. This is guy 1. This is guy 2. Has indifference curves that look like this. And moving in this direction is better. Okay. Which is fine if they were completely separate, but they are sadly not separate because there's only so much stuff in this economy, and if one guy has it, the other guy doesn't. And so the interesting thing about this is, how do they split this stuff? Okay, so let's start out with an endowment. Here's our endowment. And I'm going to draw guy 1's indifference curve. I'm going to try to keep consistent with the blue and green. Guy 1's indifference curve looks like that. And guy 2's indifference curve through the same point looks something like that. Suppose. Okay? Well, we don't know. It depends on the point I choose, obviously. But suppose it looks like that. Right? That's entirely possible with just whatever you're born with in this kind of world. And now I want to say, well, is this any good? Well, it is what it is, but it's not great, right? Because if we think about it, all of this area, any point in this area, would make both of them better off. Right? We could move, we would be on a higher indifference curve, a better indifference curve for both of them. And so we would like it if our economy did that, right? Well, why not make them both better off? So what we're saying is our initial endowment is not Pareto efficient. It is possible to make somebody better off without hurting anybody. In fact, it's possible to make everybody better off. So why the heck don't we? Right? All right. So what we can do is we can allow these guys to trade. And and they're going to come up with some prices between them, right? And it's clear that these prices have to be such so that we get into this region where they're both better off, right? Because if we had prices like, say, something really flat, like that, okay? In that case, there's no way for them to trade along that price line where they're swapping stuff. And we think about it as prices selling it for euros and buying other things with euros, but we can also just think about it as physically swapping stuff. I'll give you 2 comic books for 3 slushies or whatever, right? We can think about it like that. If they have a price line like that, there's going to be no swapping because one or the other has to be worse off, and this is a voluntary exchange. So if we move in this direction, the green guy, guy 2, is worse off. If we move in this direction, the blue guy, guy 1, is worse off. So that price line, there's going to be no swapping at all because one or the other is going to be hurt. Okay, let me get our endowment. Let me get the blue line like that and the green line, something like that. And so what we're going to end up with is, since there is this ability to swap and they can both be made better off, if we sat them in a room and said, just negotiate it out, boys, they would come up with something where they're both better off. And so they would swap some kind of line that goes through that gap in the indifference curves. So both of them are better off. How are we doing? Hi. But can it be any such line? Well, not really, right? Because I can imagine, like if that just was the line, that guy 1 would want to swap up to here, and guy 2 would want to swap up to here, right? But that's not possible because I can't have this much x1 whereas you have that much, and we have x1 that's not accounted for. Or here I want lots of x2 and you want even more x2, and there's more x2 being demanded than there is in the economy. But we have to deal with the fact that there's only so much stuff, and all the stuff has to be accounted for at the end. So this, the way I've drawn it, can't be the exact price line. We know the price line has to go through the gap in the indifference curves, but it can't just be any one. It's going to be something where the amount that I want to buy is just equal to the amount that you want to sell. And the amount that you want to buy of the other one is equal to the amount that I want to sell. So that there's no excess demand, no excess supply. Right? This one here has excess demand and excess supply. So that can't be it. So what we're going to get in the end, I can do what we actually get is something like this. We have our initial point. We've got our initial indifference curve, another initial indifference curve, and we get a price line that goes through this somewhere in such a way that they're both tangent at the same point. There. And then that is our new point. So we trade along the price line till we get there, and both of them are better off. And their indifference curves are just tangent, so there's no gap between the indifference curves anymore, and so there's no gains from trade anymore. Right? The gains from trade came because the indifference curves had this gap. Now there's no such gap, and so this is where we end up. Okay? People with me here? Sorta, kinda? Okay, sorta, kinda. All right. All right. So I have 5 minutes? Yeah, that's about right. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to be actually using going forward is this idea of a contract curve. So what we got in the end is we traded to a point where indifference curves were just tangent. We ended up at a point like that, right? But that's not the only place where indifference curves are just tangent. I could do another one way over here. Oh, not like that. Switch to blue. Where they're just tangent like that. I can do another one where they're tangent down here. Right? And I can connect all these things up if I'm so inclined. And that is called the contract curve. Bit of jargon. And a couple of things to notice. It's going to include the two origins, right? Because if I've got all the stuff and you've got nothing, that's great. But there's no trade that we can make, right? Because anything that we did, any trade that we make would hurt me, and our economics guys are bastards, and they're not going to help someone just to help them. That's not how economics works at all, right? So that can't be it. So these two endpoints, this is where guy 2 has everything, guy 1 has nothing, or guy 1 has everything, guy 2 has nothing. Those are included on our contract curves. And then there's a whole curve between the two of all the points where the indifference curves are just tangent to each other. Okay. And we have two big results in economics. The first welfare theorem, I have time to write it out. Is starting from any endowment. From any endowment, if you have a competitive economy, you will end up on the contract curve. Right? Everything on the contract curve is a Pareto efficient, so you will end up with a Pareto efficient outcome. Starting from anywhere, any endowment, divide up resources any way you like in society, let people swap, you will end up with a Pareto efficient outcome, which is gorgeous, it's lovely. Okay? And then the second welfare theorem is that for each place on the contract curve, there's a set of endowments where a competitive equilibrium would get you there. Okay? So you're always going to end up on the contract curve, assuming competitive economy, but you could end up at any of those points on the contract curve. Any of them is possible for a particular initial endowment. Okay? So this is both beautifully nice for capitalism. Look, we end up with a Pareto efficient outcome. That is a good thing. It's also absolutely horrible because any of these are possible, and some of these are really awful, right? For example, this one here, where you get everything and I get nothing. That can happen in a competitive economy, right? It's not fair, because I'm a good person, but it's possible. Right? There's nothing in the competitive economy that gives you fairness. It gives you a Pareto efficiency, but not fairness or sensibility or anything like that. Right? Or it could be that I've got everything and you've got nothing, or anywhere else along the way. Right. This is the Edgeworth box. We're going to use this contract curve talking about politics next time. I'll let you go.